arsenal of resources and materials around COVID-19. So you can look at the link below if you like more information. All right. Next slide, please. Okay, so before I pass on the mic, so to speak, to the next speakers, I'll just briefly touch on some of the challenges that we are facing. Of course, I think we all know that this is a very difficult, challenging, and unprecedented time. I believe that the government should be commended for carrying out quite an amazing balancing act. One hand, they have to look after public health and safety and well-being of individuals, of the people in Vietnam, of its citizens. At the same time, they have to balance this against the economy, in which way is it going to grow, the disruption that it faces, and these challenges that I'm sure you all are facing. You can see from some of the directives and policies that the Prime Minister and the Office of Government has rolled out, as Directive 16, this document 2601, and we're in this period of nationwide social distancing. And for those of you that follow Singapore news, there are parallels to what Singapore is doing with this circuit breaker measures. Essentially compelling and asking and requesting people to stay at home, work from home, unless you're in certain essential products, services, and activities. So in this regard, Vietnam has similar measures, and as found in the documents here. But there have been, again, of course, I suppose no surprise, that there's been sometimes concerns and questions and slight confusion about what are essential activities, what are essential products and services. And we know that there are lots of dialogue around that. But in a nutshell, as you can imagine, anything to do with medical services or medical healthcare product services, energy, telecommunications, these would still be considered, essential activities and products and services. The next bullet point is simply on financial support. My tax partner Vin will cover more of it. But as you might have read from the press, there could be things from lowering of interest rates. It could be, deferment of tax payments. And I do believe there was reported that the government would have a relief package of about, excuse me, 2.6 billion US dollars, to help those which are disadvantaged through these difficult times. I also like to point out that, notwithstanding the firefighting, the challenges that we face now, certain things are ongoing, certain dialogues and feedbacks will still be given. So as hopefully most of you, especially being members of chambers, various chambers, you could see that the Vietnam Business Forum, in particular the Investment and Trade Working Group, is asking for inputs, asking for comments, and asking for feedback. Yeah. So please understand and realize there's opportunity. There are platforms for you to share your concerns, to share your solutions, and I think all these feedback is very welcome. My last point would be around evolving laws. I think even as we are struggling and contending with present challenge, let's not forget, and again, I commend the government for this, that laws and regulations still are evolving. We are not stuck, we're not static. Hopefully we're going to turn the corner. Hopefully that we all can see light at the end of the tunnel. And just from a legal and regulatory regime perspective, you can see the government still hard at work, coming out and evolving its laws and regulations. So just very quickly, you see that they come up with a new draft investment law, enterprise law. There's also a draft personal data protection decree in the works. And what's new, that means it's already passed, but not yet in fact, is the new decree on implementing the competition law, in particular around merger filing. Now that will take effect quite soon in May. And then there's also the securities law that will take effect in 2021. So the takeaway here is that even as we meet present challenges, don't forget that we're also looking forward. Government's also looking forward, and actually laws and regulations to keep your eyes on. Final point from me is that for the Q&A side of things, you can type it into the chat. You can put it into the group chat, or you can send it to me directly. Just to manage this, everybody's put on mute except speakers. Yeah. So if there's any Q&A, please do send it through the chat group. Okay. Next slide, please. And with that, I pass it over to Hang on labor matters. Hang?
Thank you, Chung. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our webinar on various legal issues related to the COVID-19. Thank you very much, SBG and all other chambers for co-hosting the event. So my name is Hang, and I have an employment and labor practice at Baker McKenzie. For the webinar today, I will walk you through 4 main issues on the labor employment law aspect for the COVID-19 outbreak. So my presentation will focus on 4 main areas. First is the obligations for employers on the labor safety and occupational hygiene at the workplace. The second issue is about the salary pay during the COVID-19 treatment and quarantine, just in case if you have any cases at the office. The third point that I want to address to is actually a very hot topic at this moment, that is on the cut-cutting measures for the employers due to the COVID-19 outbreak. I know that all businesses are facing the challenges one way or the other due to this COVID-19 outbreak. And because of this, you are considering various cost-cutting measures to help the business weather through the crisis. And for this session, I will walk you through all the possible measures that are permitted under our Vietnamese law. The last one is also the topic that a lot of people have been interested in, that is the updates on the government support for employers and employees. So for my part, I will just focus on the supports that directly related to the employers and employees. There would be other supports from the tax and other aspects, and my partners will cover. So first of all, related to the workplace safety requirements, as you may know, Vietnamese law requires that employers have extremely broad general obligations in relation to the workplace safety. And the obligations in the context of the COVID-19 relate to 3 main areas. First, to ensure the workplace had the satisfied safety requirements with respect to hazardous and harmful factors, including infectious disease. As an employer, you also have the obligation to provide employees with information about dangerous and hazardous factors, as well as measures to ensure the safety and hygiene at the workplace. And the last obligation is to report affected and suspected cases at the workplace. So related to the first obligation, that is to ensure that the safety requirements as per the MOH recommendations on the COVID-19 prevention at workplace are met. So these obligations, I guess up to now, has been quite clear to all of you. Those obligations would include, like for example, to assign and publish the contact information of staff in charge of COVID-19 prevention at the workplace. So I know as a lot of companies, including Baker McKenzie, we have established a task force to address on the issues related to COVID-19 at the workplace. So that is something that is recommended by the MOH, but also required under Vietnamese law to have. You should arrange the area, if possible, for temporary isolation if ever needed. You should also perform the temperature screening and disinfection at the entrance at the workplace. And the last recommendation is pretty straightforward, is to provide the hand sanitizers, face masks for all the employees. So there is a practical question on this aspect. If, for example, you have an employees who refuse to come to work in the fear of contracting the COVID-19 at the workplace, could you as the employer direct the employees return to work? Actually, under our Vietnam employment law, employees can refuse to come to work if there is a clear risk to his or her health or safety at the workplace. And in that case, then the employer is obliged to continue the full pay. So assuming that all the relevant requirements on the labor safety and hygiene at the workplace are met, obviously the employees would not have any justifiable reasons not to come to work. However, for example, if you have a case, a positive case at the workplace, and for whatever reason, your office has not been shut down or the building has not been shut down by the Vietnamese government, which is pretty unlikely considering these circumstances. But let's say if it's not, then can the employees have the justifiable reasons not to come? In that case, then I would think that yes, the employee would have the justifiable reason not to come to work because of the fear of the getting constructed of the COVID-19. And in that case, then you as the employer would have the obligations to continue to pay the employee during that time. The second issue that I'm going to address in this presentation is about the salary payment during the COVID-19 treatment and quarantine. If let's say, unfortunately, you have a positive case at the workplace, then the employees would be brought to the hospital for treatment, right? So during that time, the employees would be entitled to the sick leave allowances from the social insurance. Your additional pay during this time is subject to the company's policy on sick leave. I know as a standard market practice, a lot of companies would offer the employees certain number of like paid sick leave day per year. For example, the market practice has been ranging from 6 to around 10 days per year. And if the employees are contracted the COVID-19 and has to be brought to the hospital for treatment, you can let the employee use on those kind of like paid sick leave so that the employees can also be entitled to the full pay during the treatment. Because as you know, the salary that the employee would be received from the social insurance fund is actually quite minimal. It's not the same as, it may not be the same as the actual salary that the employee would receive. How about in the events that you have the employees who is under mandatory quarantine? So if the employee is under quarantine but can still work remotely, then the employees would be entitled to the full salary as normal. However, if the employee is under quarantine and cannot work, then you as the employer may have the following options. The first option is, as a support to the employee and the family, you can continue the full pay to the employees. And I know that there's a lot of employers out there who have managed and tried to do that. Another way that you can address this situation is to ask the employees to utilize their pay leave. For example, if they have like 12 up to like 20 days of pay leave, annual holiday per year, you can ask the employee to utilize those paid leave. Now, if those pay leave had only been utilized and you cannot, for financial reasons, to pay the employee during that time, you can ask the employee to arrange for the unpaid leave. The last option would be to direct the use of work suspension due to the dangerous pandemic under our labor code. And salary during the work suspension period has to be agreed between the parties, but must not let lower than the minimum salary, the regional minimum salary. There has been a proposal from the social insurance authorities to the health insurance authority is to apply the sick leave regimes under the social insurance fund for employees who are placed under mandatory quarantine due to the COVID-19. So those employees, they are not contracted of the COVID-19, but however, because maybe they are F1, F2, F3, whatever, they are put under the mandatory quarantines, normally at the quarantine centers. There is currently a proposal for the social insurance fund to cover those employees under the sick leave regimes and the social insurance. So at least the employees would be entitled to something during the quarantine time if the employers do not pay salary. Next, I'm going to talk about various cord-cutting measures for the employers due to the COVID-19 impacts. Unfortunately, I mean, we have seen obviously all the companies are facing the problems, the impacts of the COVID-19 to a certain levels. We have seen companies that have to shut down their operations, or hotels that have like 98% of reduced capacity. So they have to let go quite a lot of employees, or they are considering various other measures to have the employers weather through this crisis. So what would be the permissible cord-cutting measures from the employment law perspective permitted under Vietnamese law? The first one is to use the annual leave or unpaid leave. So for the annual leave, the employer can consult with the employees and direct the employees to use their paid leave. The employers can set the annual leave schedules after consulting with the employees and providing the notice, and the employees' consent is generally not required. So this means that, for example, during the slow time, you can ask the employee to take this opportunity to utilize their paid leave in order to stay at home, and you don't have to pay salary extra for the employees during this time. You can also ask the employees to use unpaid leave. Now, unpaid leave it has to be consented by the employees. So normally the employees and the employer would agree on the period of unpaid leave when the production is down or closed for a short period of time. So that has to be agreed by the employees. Practically, you would not have to amend the contracts, or you would not have to put down a very heavy drafted written agreement on the unpaid leave. You can practically agree with the employees over the emails. That should be okay. The second option is to negotiate a reduction of salary and benefits. So reduction of salary and benefits must be consented by the employees. Is this being used very, very widely at this moment by various companies? And the reduction level varies. I mean, some companies would try to reduce the salary down to around 50% or 30%. Some companies would do maybe 20 or 30% only. There are also questions about, what if I just want to reduce the working hours without reducing the salary and benefits for the employees? For example, typically in the production, you don't have enough materials. You may just scale down the operations to around 60 or 70% for maybe 1 or 2 months. So you reduce the working hours, but at the same time, you don't reduce the benefits of the employees. In that kind of situation, you would not need to obtain the consent from the employees. You as the employers would have the right to organize the business in the way that it fits the business, including the changing the working hours. But if the reduction of the salary corresponds with the reduction of working hours corresponds with the reduction of salary and benefits, and you would need the consent from the employees. Another measure which is also being used quite frequently at this moment is to temporarily suspend the contract with the employees. So basically, in this case, you agree with the employees that the labor contract performance during maybe April, May to June would be temporarily suspended. In this kind of situation, normally the suspension is going to be without pay. In some situations, you may also agree to provide some minimum allowances for the employees to maybe like maintain cover their basic living cost. In this kind of situation, the parties have to agree, because the suspension of the contract is quite important, so I would recommend that in this case, you agree with the employee through maybe amendment of the contracts or a written agreement specifically between the parties. Another measure that is also being used and invoked quite frequently at this moment is the work suspension due to the dangerous pandemic. So Vietnamese law do allow employers to suspend the work, so direct the suspension of the work due to objective reasons such as natural disasters, fire, dangers, pandemics, and obviously the COVID-19 is qualified as one. So, but the problem is that during the work suspension that you want to use based on this clause, the parties must agree on the reduced salary and benefits. And the reduced salary cannot be lower than the applicable regional minimum wage. So for Ho Chi Minh City, if your company is located in Ho Chi Minh City, Ho Chi Minh City is within the region number 1, which has the highest amount of general minimum wage, which is around 4.2 or 4.3 million USD at this moment. The next measure is that you can also use is to temporarily shift the employees to lower pay positions. So Vietnamese law do allow the employer to, for business reasons, to move the employee around and move them to a lower pay positions for up to 60 days. However, I have not seen this measure being used very commonly because normally if you have the scaling down of the business, or you have the COVID-19 impact, you may not have other positions for the employees to move to. So, but I just put it out there as one of the options for you to consider. You can also delay the salary payments for the employees. A lot of companies have asked for, because of the cash flow issue, you may not have enough cash in your balance sheet at this moment to pay the salary for the employees for April, for example. Can you delay the salary payment or part of the salary payment until June or until May? Vietnamese law do allow the employers to delay the salary payment up to 1 month maximum. Now, if the delay is more than 15 days, you do have to pay a little bit of the extra interest rate, but you do have that right and you don't have to ask the employees for employees' consent to do that. However, if the delay is more than 1 month and you do need the employee consent. So those measures that I mentioned are what I call maybe a little bit of the softer measures that you can manage the financial burdens and economic impacts for your business during this time. There are other measures which are a little bit more aggressive, that is to terminate the employment contract of the employees. If you are thinking of that, and I can lay out a couple options for you to do. In terms of the terminations of employment, the first thing that you should consider is to try to obtain the mutual separation with the employees. Considering Vietnam is generally a pretty employee friendly jurisdiction, mutual separation is always the best way. Now, during this time, a lot of employees would feel maybe more sympathetic to the companies and would agree to mutually separate. Otherwise, there are 2 other ways that you can unilaterally terminate the employees during this time. The first one is to unilaterally terminate the employees because the COVID-19 is identified under just our labor code as the force majeure event. And our labor code do allow the employers to, that if there is in the case of dangerous pandemic and you have to scale down the production or cut jobs, you can unilaterally terminate the employees. However, in this case, you have the burden of proof to prove that the employers have applied on remedial measures to maintain the jobs for the employees. And you still have to comply with the requirements on notice payment, notice period given, payment of statutory severance allowance, if any. In terms of like how to prove that you have certified and apply all the remedial measures to maintain the jobs of the employees, go back to other softer measures that I just mentioned in terms like, put the employees on paid leave or unpaid leave or temporary suspend. So if you have proved to the government that you have tried all those kind of measures before you exercise the right to terminate the employee unilaterally, then you would have more legal basis to go through that. And the last one would be the retrenchment due to the redundancy. Lots of companies have also asked me about, for this kind of situation, would the Vietnamese law allow any streamlined process to go for the employers to go through the retrenchment? The answer is that no, unfortunately, you still have to go through a pretty onerous and lengthy process for the redundancy, which requires the union's consultation for the labor usage plan and notification with the labor authority at least 30 days before you can rechange the employees. So it's generally a long process, and normally it would take 2 to 3 months to fully complete the whole process. But the option is there if you want to utilize. And I guess in the upcoming months, maybe we see this more. I think I don't have a lot of more times, but I just want to quickly update you with the relief package for the employers and employees that actually just announced by the Prime Minister under the resolution for number 42. The resolution number 42 does address quite a few other reliefs as well, but for the purpose of my presentations, I'm gonna just focus on 3 points. So the first support is that the employees whose labor contracts are temporarily suspended or who are placed on the unpaid leave by their employers for 1 month and above due to the impacts of the COVID-19, they would be entitled to a monthly allowance of 1.8 million VND, not US dollar. And that would be equal around 78 or 80 US dollar per month. The employees whose labor contracts are terminated but are not eligible for unemployment insurance allowance would be receiving for the period of 3 months from April to June, a support of 1 million VND per month. So 1 million is around 43 to 45 US dollar. And also a specific support for the employers is that if the employers who have suffered the financial difficulties due to the COVID-19 outbreak and have already prepaid at least 50% of the salary for the work suspension, then the employers would be able to borrow a loan of 0% interest from the Vietnam Bank of Social Policies. So that's the 3 main, supports from the relief package that was announced by under Resolution 42. I just want to highlight that under this package, the employers and employee have to apply for it at the local authority. So just bear in mind that it's not automatically eligible. That's gonna be just like sent to your bank account. You do have to go through a little bit of formality, and I understand the government has made a lot of efforts to make it as streamlined as possible. Yeah, so maybe I stop here, and thanks for listening, and I'm happy to stay up towards the end to the Q&A if you have any questions. Thank you. Over to you, Joe.
Thank you very much, Hằng. Yes, we'll move on to the next slide. But we certainly will follow up. If there's a bit of time Q&A, then Hằng, we can speak a bit more. But certainly we'll follow up to provide more materials, especially around this new relief package. Okay, so Vin, I think you're up next on tax measures.
Yeah, thanks, Jung. And good morning, everyone. My name is Vin Nguyen. I'm a partner and head of the tax and customs practice of Baker McKenzie. I'm very pleased to discuss with you and present on the tax-related measures that the government provide to the business in response to the impacts of COVID-19. I will provide you with a briefing on what are the tax relief measures that the government has provided and who are the eligible taxpayers. And if you are qualified for those tax relief measures, what are the procedures for companies, taxpayers to apply for such tax relief measures? So as you know, right early on 4th March 2020, when the situation was just still an epidemic, not yet a pandemic, the government has looked into this issue to find ways to support the business to respond to the difficult times of the epidemic. And at that time, the Prime Minister has issued the directive number 11 on 4th March to assign relevant ministries to implement various action plans to support the business communities. So in terms of tax-related measures to implement that Prime Minister directive, the government just issued last week on 8th April, decree number 41, which covers the deferral of tax and land rental payments to a number of business sectors. So those are the main points under that decree number 41. Under decree 41, the businesses, including organizations, companies, business households, and individuals are eligible for that kind of deferral of tax and land rental payment, are divided into 5 groups. Group 1 mainly includes manufacturing businesses in the sectors such as foodstuff production, textile and apparel production, leather processing, lumber processing, metal processing, mechanical processing, electronics, computers, optical products, automobiles, and other motor vehicles, and manufacture of beds, closet tables, chairs, and construction. Group number 2 covers the service business, such as transportation and warehousing, accommodation and catering, education and training, healthcare and social support activities, real estate business, employment service, travel agency, travel services, and auxiliary services related to promotion and organization of travel tours, art and entertainment, and cultural activities, sports, recreation and entertainment, and cinemas. Group number 3 cover businesses manufacturing prioritized supportive industrial products and major mechanical products. Of course, there are supporting regulations to define what are the prioritized supportive industrial products. Group number 4 is applicable to small and ultra small enterprises. And group number 5 includes credit institutions and foreign bank branches implementing measures to support enterprises, organizations, and individuals affected by the COVID-19 pandemic, as announced by the State Bank of Vietnam, as previously just mentioned by Ham, under the credit facilities were considered by the government. They consider like granting zero interest loans or low interest loans to organizations and individuals. So those banks will be entitled to this kind of tax deferral. So those are the 5 groups of eligible taxpayers to enjoy the deferral. The deferral is applicable to value-added tax and corporate income tax. For value-added tax, the deferral is applicable to the monthly tax returns for March, April, May, and June 2020 for businesses which file tax return on a monthly basis. For those which file tax return on a quarterly basis, this deferral is applicable to Q1 and Q2 2020 of the companies. So the deferral is 5 months. Even with the deferral, companies are still required to make the filings of the VAT returns as usual. It's just that you don't need to pay tax after 5 months. For corporate income tax deferral, the deferral is applicable to any remaining FY 2019 tax finalization amount. So for FY 2019, after March 2020, the company is required to pay any outstanding tax liability for FY 2019. So now you get 5-month deferral for this tax FY 2019 tax finalization. And the deferral is also applicable to the provisional quarterly tax payment for Q1 and Q2 as well. For individual businesses, since those business individuals just pay VAT and personal income tax instead of corporate income tax. So those business households and individuals also are allowed to defer any tax payables for 2020 until 31st December 2020. The deferral under this decree is also applicable to land rental payment as well. However, it is only applicable to any land rental for those who lease land directly from the state. So mostly the case where manufacturing companies which lease land directly from the government. So it's not, it does not cover like land rental incurred under the contract between the businesses and businesses. If your business are qualified for those deferral, what are the procedures for you to enjoy it? So under the guidelines on this decree, the entities business qualified for this deferral are required to file a form, a request form provided under this decree to the local tax authority no later than 30th July 2020. Beyond this date, if you file this request beyond this date, no deferral will be granted. So it's important for the companies now to assess whether you are under the list of five groups. And then if you are qualified for it, make sure you file the request before 30th July. Otherwise, after this date, no more deferral is accepted. Another important point to note is that this kind of deferral is on a self-assessment basis. And that means the company as a business, based on the law, based on the decree, and relevant regulations, you assess the business by yourself if you are qualified for the deferral, and then if you believe that you are qualified for it, you make a filing. I think I was cut at the point that in order to apply for the deferral, companies need to file the tax. To file a request to the tax authority by 30th July. Otherwise, any request filed after this date will not be accepted. And another important point to note is that this application of this deferral is based on a self-assessment basis. That means you self-assess your business, and if you believe that you are qualified for it, you file the request to the tax authority. The tax authority is not going to provide any confirmation in writing or approval in writing that you are qualified for the deferral. So the risk here is that if later on during a tax audit, tax authority conclude that the deferral is wrongly applied, incorrectly applied, then they have the right to impose penalty and interest with respect to the period that the company deferred the payment of the tax, and according to the opinion of the tax authority, which is not properly applied. Therefore, the implication for business is this is a good incentive, support provided by the government, but you have, as a business, you have to careful consider whether your business is properly fit in those categories of 5 groups provided by the decree. And then if it is, file the request to the tax authority by 30th July. And it's important, again, to make sure that you carefully assess your eligibility for the deferral to avoid any potential penalty or interest if you apply it incorrectly. So that's all my sharing with you today, and we can go back to during the Q&A session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vin. That's a lot of good stuff there. And again, whether it's Q&A or after this webinar, I will definitely be happy to share more information materials. Okay, can I move to the next slide? Okay, G, do you want to lead us on this? Thanks.
So good morning, everyone. So my name is Chi Quack. So Ming is my middle name. So I'm gonna share my video just for a couple of seconds so that you can see me, and then I'm wanna stop it to save bandwidth because I appreciate that perhaps we don't have a very strong connection. So here I am. And so today I think in the next 15 to 20 minutes, I'm going to discuss about force majeure events under Vietnamese law under the contracts and the legal consequences of invoking the force majeure clause and other consideration. So let me just turn off stop video. So we are living in a very difficult times, the COVID times, where many businesses in Vietnam and all over the world are suffering, a lot of loss and a lot of unprecedented, events right now. Some businesses, you cannot deliver your products to your customers, and we understand that many others, you cannot receive your materials from your suppliers. Some other business, because the number of customers visiting your stores, visiting your shops, they reduce substantially. So your revenue reduce substantially, and you cannot pay the rental fees to your landlords. So a lot of unfortunate things happening, and they trigger the questions on whether or not you can invoke the force majeure event under Vietnamese law or under the contract to try to escape or at least mitigate your liabilities to your customers in case you cannot deliver the products, or in case you cannot deliver the materials to your customers, whether or not you can invoke the force majeure, and whether you can reduce the rental fees to your landlords. So that's the questions that many businesses in Vietnam has raised so far. So before I go into a little more details, may I just qualify that there might be no template answers. There is no answers that can fit all of the circumstances in Vietnam, simply because the answers varies from case to case, and the answers as to whether you can invoke the force majeure events under the law, it needs a lot of information about the facts, the specific facts in your case. So, and of course, it would need a lot of information about the contents of your contracts with your business partner. So we may not be able to give you a specific answer. However, I will try to provide you with some suggestion from which you could perhaps find out your answers, or at least navigate you during this difficult time to see if you can invoke the support measure and how to negotiate with your business partner during this difficult time. So in any case, even if we cannot find out a specific answer, I believe to answer the question whether you can invoke the force majeure event or FM, in short, FM event, the answer must come from the basic principles and of Vietnamese law. So let me start, from the review of a very quick review of how Vietnamese law provides and defines force majeure events, FM event. The Civil Code of Vietnam, it does provide for a definition of FM, and under that definition, there are two major conditions for an event to qualify as a FM event. The reason being why I refer to the Civil Code is that Civil Code is a fundamental law of Vietnam. There are some other laws in Vietnam which also provides for FM events, such as the commercial law and the construction law. However, they are applicable to the specific context in commercial transactions, or they are specific to construction, construction contract. So Civil Code, it could apply to a broader context, and actually the definition of FM event under the Civil Code is more specific than that in other laws of Vietnam. So the first suggestion that we really want to make is that perhaps you may want to take a look into the Civil Code of Vietnam to see how it defines FM event. So going back to the definition and the conditions, the Civil Code defines FM event as an event that is objective and unforeseeable. So this is the first condition for an event to qualify as an FM event. It must be objective and unforeseeable. There are a lot of, maybe not a lot, but there is a number of interpretations for this first condition. But I think most of the interpretations, all of them just agreed on the condition is that an FM event must not be created by one party in the contract. It must be objective. So it must be an event happening, by a third party, or by an act of God, or by perhaps a government order. It must not be an action by one party in a contract. So it is something that perhaps could give some suggestion for the parties. And an FM event must not be foreseeable. So without going into too much details on what kind of event could be foreseeable and what kind of other events could be unforeseeable, one of the interpretation that is accepted by a lot of justice in Vietnam and local courts in Vietnam is that an event is unforeseeable if the two parties to the contract at the time when they sign the contract, they cannot, or they do not have reasons to foresee that event at the time when they sign the contract. So the timing here is quite important. The time to when the contract is executed, you cannot foresee the event. So for COVID-19, I think the first condition, this first condition could be met for COVID-19. Now, I'm not saying that it could be met for for all of the businesses in Vietnam, for all of the companies in Vietnam, but for many businesses and many companies in Vietnam, many of you could argue that COVID-19 is an objective event because it is not created by any of you as a party to a contract. It is something happened without your control, beyond your control. It is, so therefore it is objective. And at the same time, it is unforeseeable because no one no one in Vietnam, except for perhaps experts in medicine area, they can foresee this area, and they are experts. But we, as a parties to a commercial contract, we are just average persons in the industry, and we don't have obligations to foresee. And actually, we cannot foresee this COVID outbreak, particularly at the time when we signed the contract. So the first condition for FM event is likely be met in Vietnam for many businesses in Vietnam. So, but the second condition for FM, I think, is more difficult. So what is it? The second condition? The second condition is that, I think Thúy Hằng briefly mentioned about it. In order for an event to qualify as an FM event, the party that who wants to invoke the FM event must prove that they have tried all of the remedial measures. However, they cannot, all of those remedial measures cannot work and cannot, cure the event. So this is quite difficult, and we appreciate that in many cases, businesses and companies in Vietnam, we don't know how to prove that an event is, they don't know how to identify the remedial measures that can apply to cure the event. And there is a lot of interpretations on the remedial events, and those interpretations, again, they vary from case to case and from industry to industries. But one of the conversions, one of the common idea to interpret this second condition for FM events is that if a party, if they have other options, and if they have tried on other options, but those other options do not work, then they can have a good reasons to argue that they have an FM event, or at least they can argue that the second condition for the FM event is met. So what are the other options? Again, this is really depends on the facts of the case, and the questions on whether a company can refer to the fact that their delivery service provider cannot release products to their customers, whether or not it is an FM event. That question is coming up a lot of times recently, but there are also some versions of that answers. On one hand, the company that cannot deliver the products to their customers, they can argue that this is an FM event because the government, they simply issues the social distancing order that restrict all of the delivery of products, and some roads are even closed in Vietnam. Therefore, they cannot deliver the products. However, other businesses, other companies in Vietnam, particularly the companies who want to receive the products, some of them argue that actually there might be other methods to deliver the products. And if the other party, if they want to invoke the FM event, they need to prove that they did try other options, other delivery method, other than the methods that they have been using for a long time. They have to try other options, other delivery methods. So that is some sort of arguments that the two parties usually have by now. And the same arguments could be made in the case of tenant and landlord. In case a tenant cannot pay the full rental fees to the landlord, usually the tenants want to revoke their reductions of customers. The fact that the number of customers visiting their stores reduce substantially as an FM event, because it is really something that they are unforeseeable, they do not expect, and it is something that they cannot cure because they don't have any other options That is good argument. However, at the same time, some landlords, they argue that even if the number of your customers reduce substantially, you still have a financial support from the government. And it could be another options for you to explore and to try pay me. So you need to try other options for the financial options before you can argue that the reduction of your customers visiting your store. Visiting your store is a FM event. So as you can see here, there are always two sides of a coin. And I'm not saying that you cannot invoke an FM event, but what we are suggesting here is that you really need to take a look into the law, and more importantly, take a look into your contracts, because the law, like I said, there are various definitions, and the definitions themselves are not very much unclear. The definition just give you a general idea of what can be FM events in Vietnam. And the law also, at the same time, the law allows a party to define FM events in their contract and to give more specific for the FM event in their contract. So in many cases, the two parties in a contract, they may or may not, but in many cases they may define an FM event to include not just only act of God, not just a government order, but also some event, some pandemic event or epidemic. So I don't think I have much time left. So let me just go straight on the legal consequences in case you can invoke an FM event. So the law is quite clear. So in case you can invoke an FM event, you can renegotiate with your business partner, the other party in your contract, on how to address that event. So the party has the freedom to renegotiate. Now, in case you cannot renegotiate or the negotiation is not successful, you can still refer to other provisions of law to at least postpone your obligations, certain obligations under the contract until the time when the FM event is over. So you can postpone certain obligations. For example, if you cannot deliver the products to your customers, and if you cannot negotiate with your customers, perhaps you can postpone that delivery obligations until the FM event is over. And in case the postponement of an obligation is impossible, you can even terminate the contract. Terminate the contract in case, but again, we must say in case other options, postponement or renegotiation, if other option does not work, you can try perhaps the last resort, which is to terminate the contract. And the law of Vietnam is not very much clear, but it does provide that in case of FM event, you may be exempt from the liabilities for the postponement or the termination of the contract. So those are some very basic information about FM event and how to invoke it. And again, suggestions, just to recap our suggestion, taking a look into the law, even though the law is quite general, and more importantly, taking a look into your contract to see how you define the FM event, and try to renegotiate with your business partner to reach an agreement. And the answer may not be the same for all of the case. It varies from case to case. But in your case, we really hope that you can find out your answers. So that is my part. Thank you, everyone. I appreciate that there is a Q&A session, by the end of this webinar. So I look forward to receiving your questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, G. I mean, no pretense that this is an area of contention, and perhaps going forward and see whether there are any case studies or precedent that's coming out of this current scenario. So let's move on to the next slide. Okay, so last but not least, like Lan Feng to talk to us about corporate licensing procedures at the Department of Planning and Investment. Again, as a reminder, because business does carry on. Copy.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Phương, and I'm a corporate partner here at Baker McKenzie Ho Chi Minh City office. Due to the coronavirus and the social distancing policy that has been applied by the government for the last 2 weeks or so, you will see that not just enterprises have switched to working from home mode. The authorities, they have also switched to working from home mode. To implement the social distancing, they have also introduced a number of changes to the way that they handle administrative procedures with enterprises. So in particular, today we're looking at the investment procedures and enterprise procedures at the relevant Department of Planning and Investment in Ho Chi Minh City and Hanoi, which are basically the two centers of of the economy here in Vietnam. First and foremost, at the DPI, Department of Planning Investment in Ho Chi Minh City, they seems to be the one that has applied strictest the social distancing policy by switching all administrative procedures into either online filings or use the delivery service of the Ho Chi Minh City Post Office. In DPI, there are two departments: the Foreign Investment Department that are in charge of investment procedures, and the other department is the Business Registration Departments that are in charge of enterprise procedures under the enterprise law. In terms of the foreign investment procedures, before the commencement of the social distancing period, they completely worked directly with enterprises. If you need anything, you need to submit an application. You go in person to DPI office, Foreign Investment Department, to work with them. However, starting from April 1st, the Foreign Investment Department also switched to mostly online filing, and also thereafter by the use of post office. It really depends on the procedures that you need to do with the investment department. If you need to apply for a new investment registration certificate for new investment project, I mean, not many new investment projects are being applied for during this time. But nonetheless, if you're applying for new investment registration certificate, if you are applying for M&A approval for M&A transactions, for charter capital increase, then there are a few steps that you need to follow. First and foremost, you need to submit online, use the online application that are indicated by the Department of Planning and Investment. They will review the online applications, and if everything is okay, they will give the green light. Then you will work with the post office to submit the hard copies of the application. You need to provide proper POA to the post office so that they can represent you at the department, at the DPI. In the POA, there should be sufficient details about the application, but more importantly, there should be sufficient contact information of the person that is in charge of the application, so that the authority, they will contact you when the IRC is issued. And when the IRC is issued or M&A approval is issued, they will let you know via the email address or contact information provided, and you're supposed to work with the post office again to collect the IRC or the M&A approval. If you are applying for amending your IRC, however, you don't need to follow the online filing. You can work directly with the post office in order to submit the applications and also to receive the application from the DPI. if you have submitted your application prior to the social distancing period and you're supposed to receive your result during this period of time, of course, as the DPI, they implying the social distancing policy, you're not supposed to go to DPI office and pick up your license. As normal, you would go to the post office, work with them, give them the original IRC or amended IRC that you need to return to the DPI, and then the post office will work on your behalf and receive the results from the DPI. The online filing actually has been applied by the business registration office for a while now. So the system is available, and you should be familiar with you know, how it works. But during the social distancing period, you also need to use the post office in order to submit original application and also receive the original results from them. Regarding DPI Hanoi, they are a little behind in terms of enforcing this policy. The foreign investment departments, they have not really started the online registration system yet. You can still either come to DPI office to submit application in person, or you can use the Hanoi Post to do, you know, to provide the service for you. With the business registration office in Hanoi office, they have started the online filing system, and in the notice that they issue on April 3rd, all the enterprises should first and foremost submit online application, and thereafter you should work with the Hanoi Post in order to submit hard copies of the application and also receive the results from DPI, from the business registration office. Now, in terms of, I know that some of you are maintaining representative offices of foreign merchants in Vietnam, and some of you are also trading companies that you need to work with a different authorities, which is the Department of Industry and Trade in Hanoi and Ho Chi Minh. At the DOIT, they have not really started the online filing requirements for the trade-related matters. So basically, if you have a business license that you need to update, or you need to, let's say, filing for a new retail store license during this time, you need to work either directly in person with them, or also, you know, use the service of the post office. Relating to rep offices licenses, the Ho Chi Minh City DOIT, they have used the online filing system for most of the procedures. And when the online application filing is approved, you would use the post office to submit and also collect the result from them. However, DOIT in Hanoi, they have not used the online filing requirements for consistently for most of the rep office related matters. Only the filing for closing down the rep office should be filed online first and foremost. For other matters, you should just use the postal services. All right, so there are a number of issues that that enterprises are facing during this time. For most of the applications at the Vietnam authority, the requirement is that you must submit the legalized copy of corporate papers from overseas. Some companies are wondering whether the government is flexible about, you know, the delay submissions of the legalized documents, or even a waiver of the legalized documents during this time. But the answer is no. The Vietnamese authority, they have not been that flexible I think mainly because there's no legal basis for them to, there's no guidance from the higher authority for them to waive or to delay the submissions of the legalized documents right now yet. And I mean, most officers, they are still not comfortable, you know, to be responsible for something new, you know, for some out of the box thinking. And so the answer is that they have not really accepted the legalized documents delay during this period. Some of the documents that we help our client to submit to the authority use e-signatures. Whether e-signatures are accepted under Vietnamese law, that is the question. Basically, under Vietnamese law, e-signatures can be equally effective and equally valid if the e-signatures satisfy certain requirements under Vietnamese law. If the e-signatures are certified by the certification authorities that are recognized in Vietnam, the like of FPT or VNPT or Viettel, for example, then there is legal basis to argue with the government that the e-signatures are equally effective and valid and should be accepted by the authorities. But the documents that use e-signature that are certified by an overseas certification authority have been rejected by the Vietnamese authorities so far, because actually there's no legal basis for the Vietnamese authority to recognize such e-signatures that are certified by the non-recognized certification authorities in Vietnam yet. Last but not least, I think that the social distancing policy period has been almost to the end of April 15. The Ho Chi Minh City government is at least has proposed to the government to extend further social distancing period. And so I think in the upcoming few weeks, we're not sure if there'll be any changes to to these new measures that are being applied. But the online filing and also the e-signatures will definitely not stop after the social distancing period. As a matter of fact, the government has issued Decree 45 on digitalization of admin procedures. And this decree will take effect on 22nd May this year. And it will provide the platform or the legal basis for the majorities of the admin procedures to be converted onto the online environment. But nonetheless, I mean, the implementation of the new decree remains to be seen.
Okay, thank you very much. So, Lan Phong, I believe you have finished your part of the presentation. So right now we're in the last 10 minutes in the Q&A session. I know I have some questions, I think, for the folks. But in the meantime, just picking up a bit on what Lan Phong was saying at the end, is around the use of e-signatures, digital signatures, and that comes under the broader realm of smart cities and e-government, which is definitely has been, remains, and will certainly continue to be a focus, to be a vision for the government and for the city leaders. So I think the whole COVID-19 pandemic has really brought to the forefront how the use of technology is going to be it's going to be a game changer. The way that we have adapted to the way that the way that we're doing running this webinar, for example. There will be laws that come out of all this, but again, how it's going to be implemented, at what speed, those are the questions that that will kick up and things that we'll continue to observe. Okay, now, so for the Q&A, I think, Hang, I just want to make sure that you're still there. Okay, I have a question, a sort of maybe twofold question. One is around trade union. You know, how do we see the trade unions? Do we have an experience? How do we see the sort of trade unions reacting to the current situation? And I also have maybe a broader question that's around supply chain restructuring, supply chain recalibration. Perhaps this is also a question for Lan Fong. I know that these were we're seeing movements, we're seeing a lot of interest around supply chain restructuring, recalibration before the pandemic. Do we think that this will continue? How does the HR side fit into all of this? Do we think that this is going to come back as it's stalled? So those are some of the questions that I have. So I just want to make sure that Thuy Hang is on.
Hi, Chung.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thanks for the question on the trade union, which is quite interesting. I have to say that for my own observation, I have not seen trade unions being very active in partnering and assisting the employers to address employment and labor issues during this time. We have seen a lot of questions from our clients related to the role of the union in all the HR processes a lot of which that I have discussed previously. But in terms from the union side, in terms of their proactive move to help the employers to address the labor relations issues, especially when it comes to, like, for example, work suspension or temporary suspension of labor contracts or laying off employees. I personally have seen the unions being very proactive. Having said that, I mean, the union has also proposed and actually already granted certain relief for the employers' contributions to the trade union fund. So you know that there has been a decision by the Vietnam Confederation of Labor Unions to reduce, to temporarily suspend the contribution to the trade union fund, that 2% of the payroll that used to contribute to the social insurance fund, to suspend for the contribution for 3 months, temporary until the end of June. And there is a possibility to suspend it for the whole 2020 as well. However, this is just a suspension. It's not a reduction or a waiver of the trade union fund a contribution fee for the employer, which we have been complaining that it's not reasonable for the employers to contribute, right? So, I mean, that's, you can see that there's a positive contributions or support by the VGCL. On the other hand, a lot of companies have complained that it's not supportive enough. I mean, if you want to support, you should just waive the contribution fee. So short answer to the question, I think that if you have a large scale impact on your employee, on your workforce, for example, we have had cases where a hotel would have to let go a couple of hundred of employees. For those kind of situation, it is very important and very good if you get your local trade union to be on board with you and support in terms of the communication with the employees and everything. So that is great. On the other hand, if you ask me, if I have seen like the trade union kind of like step up in their role, in their assistance to the employers, I myself have not seen it. There may be other cases out there, but I guess that is something that definitely the business community would much welcome that kind of assistance and support from the trade unions.
All right, thank you very much. I'm starting to see also questions that are coming in on the spot. I wouldn't answer that right now. I mean, how you can take a look at it. Certainly, we're always happy to follow up after, rather than trying to answer some of these things on the fly while looking at the screen and reading at the same time. Hang, do take a look. I'm going to move on with some other questions first, but if you want to jump in, please feel free to, okay?
Okay, thank you.
Maybe I'll just, may I just, again, turn back to Lan Phong, and back to sort of earlier, one of my earlier questions around supply chain restructuring, which we know it was a phenomenon, was happening, because of the U.S., China trade tensions, etc. Some would say it even gets accelerated right now when I think one of the strategies that a lot of MNCs are looking at is to make sure there's a diversification of risk, diversification of supply chain. But of course, to implement something like this, it's not going to happen just tomorrow. There are a lot of steps involved in restructuring and moving supply chains. So just ask Lan Phong quickly whether she has any sort of brief observations or comments around this.
Yes, thank you, Chung. So we're talking about social distancing, and we're talking about the impacts that COVID-19 has had on businesses. But the positive side of everything is that we've still seen companies that are planning on further steps that will follow, the end of the pandemic. We've seen that many U.S. corporations, they are because of the, previously because of the trade tension between U.S. and China, they have already had planned to divert the outsourcing capability to other countries, and Vietnam is a favorite destination. And I mean, on our daily basis, we have still received requests from U.S. corporation to help them with preparation steps to set up representative offices, to set up manufacturing companies, trading companies, outsourcing companies in Vietnam. Like I mentioned before, there's some obstacles with obtaining legalized documentations from offshore, obtaining wet signatures on applications and everything, because people are still are still working from home and trying to cope with the situation. But a lot of questions are still on this topic, and we will see that there will be a surge of investment into Vietnam following the pandemic.
All right, thank you. I think we have to draw this webinar to a close. These are just some final comments from me. We will certainly follow up with the various questions and the various topics. I mean, for example, I was really interested in the tax deferment and how effectively that is going to be implemented. And we're more than happy to share the experience once we have it. And of course, I do ask that participants also do share with us. There's more links here that you can see if you're interested in materials. Final shout out to our sponsors for sponsoring this event for Singapore Business Group activities. I have one small final message, which I hope you all can see here. It says donate. I didn't get that on the slides in time. Basically, even as we struggle through this as businesses, just bear in mind that there are also individuals, disadvantaged young people, kids, families that I'm sure are going through a much harder time than some of us who let's face it, have a bit of luxury to work from home in relative comfort. So as you know, the Vietnamese Fatherland Front does have a place where you can donate. And in full disclosure, I'm a member of the Board of Trustees of the Saigon Children Charity. Some will remember the Ciclo races from more than 10, 15 years ago, and perhaps also the Saigon Summer Ball. So they're organizing donations to come up with emergency relief package for disadvantaged children. So again, whether these are the charities that you want to donate to, or you have others that you prefer, please do so. Okay, so with this, I want to say thank you very much. Final words from me is that please keep the social distancing. Keep your hands clean. Wear a mask when you go outside. Okay, thank you everyone, and good health. Bye.